Our next talk, Justin will talk about cross-device tracking, measurement, and disclosures.
All right, is that good? Can you hear me? Okay, good, thanks. So this is some research I did with some colleagues at the FTC, Phoebe, Aaron, and Tina, on cross-device tracking, how companies can kind of correlate what you do on one computer to another device. This sort of research was very novel for the FTC. We've never really done this sort of thing before. It was certainly novel for me. I'm not an academic. I do not have an academic background. I do not have a computer science background. So this talk will be a little different than some other ones. We kind of meander a little bit through law and policy and business practices, maybe more than some other talks. What is the FTC? I added this slide last night after talking to a bunch of folks here who seemed to have no idea who we were or why we might be interested in showing up. So with two different missions, one antitrust, and then consumer protection is the side that we're on. There's no dedicated privacy law or general privacy law in the United States, unlike a lot of other countries, like the GDPR recently passed in the EU. But FTC has been worked on privacy for about at least 20 years. They've had the Division of Privacy and Identity Protection, which is kind of the de facto DPA in the United States. What do we do? So we don't enforce a dedicated privacy law, but we do have these very old 100-year-old statutes for basic consumer protection. Thou shalt not deceive people and don't be unfair. There's a test for unfairness which has evolved over the years, has to cause harm, can't be avoidable, not offset by countervailing benefits. But we've enforced these in dozens and dozens and probably hundreds of privacy and data security cases. One thing I do want to highlight for y'all is that a lot of the work we do, the enforcement work, does come out of academia. So one recent example, the InMobi case we have. InMobi is a mobile advertising network. They were evading device location controls. They were kind of using BSS IDs as a proxy, even when you had location turned off, and so we brought a case there. Jonathan Mayer is an academic who found that Google was dropping double-click cookies on Safari, even though Safari is configured not to do that. The Silver Push warning letters, it was exciting to see someone on the last panel talk about Silver Push. I actually wrote those letters. So we try to keep up with the academic literature, but don't always do a great job. So reach out, pitch us on stuff, let us know what you're working on. Okay, one last slide on the FTC. We do policy guidance, we do education. And then what this is and what we're trying to do more of is sometimes we draw attention to emerging practices. And so my group is pretty new, Office of Technology, Research and Investigation, trying to figure out exactly what we're doing at the FTC. But sometimes things aren't necessarily illegal, but maybe we think they need a little more transparency. And so that's what we thought about cross-device tracking, which led to this research. So cross-device tracking, we tried to set up a study to see, what data collection on two different devices we could detect, along with disclosures about cross-device tracking. Before that, we reached out to a bunch of companies to have them explain to us what they actually do. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about what we've learned as kind of some of the industry practices. Okay, so everyone knows how traditional cookie tracking works, but companies don't really love cookies. They're not really that useful for a lot of things. They're not inter-device. They're not even really intra-device, right? They can't be used to correlate what you do across different apps, across different browsers. They're also not traditionally tied to personally identifiable information, partly because these companies really want to have a relationship to get that previously. Also get the privacy concerns. A lot of people didn't love the idea of companies tracking us around the web by real name. This became an issue in 2001. DoubleClick, before they were bought by Google, merged with a company called Abacus, which is a data broker. A lot of people were concerned that they're going to merge those databases and start watching what you do by real name. FTC got involved long before I was there. And they closed the case. They said, we're closing it because DoubleClick promised they weren't going to merge the data sets. They're going to keep it anonymous. And so for a lot of years, there's always the argument, well, why you cared about this? It's always anonymous. That's obviously changed a lot in practice, but in a lot of the way companies talk about this and a lot of the privacy policies, you do see this distinction between name and email. Okay, there we're not going to share, but cookies, IP, URL, that's totally fine. But as we're going to see in a little bit, that's obviously broken down a lot. And so the companies that still use cookies, but now there's a lot more devices out there, a lot more data they don't have as much visibility into, and it's harder to tie it all together. The use cases, I mean, obviously targeting is an intuitive one. If I almost buy those shoes on one device, maybe they'll show me an ad for on another. But in practice, a lot of companies told us they don't do that because that would creep people out. Instead, they do things that are a little harder to see, like analytics or measurement. And attribution is actually one of the primary use cases that a lot of companies describe to us. So if I see an ad for Wonder Bread on my phone, later if I purchase that on Amazon on my desktop computer, or I hit the Buy Now Smart button on my toaster, or I purchase it at a grocery store, the company that delivered the ad really wants to know that, because then they can say to Wonder Bread how awesome our ads are and try to get more money from them. So two different methods that companies primarily use to do this sort of thing. Probabilistic, where they kind of make guesses based on shared attributes, and then deterministic, where they tie devices together with a persistent real-world identifier, often an email address. So how does probabilistic work? I'm a company. I have visibility to these 3 devices, but I have no way to really tie them together. But then over time, I start seeing information that maybe I can use to make correlations between them. So this one computer on the left, they see I kind of use the same IP address during weekdays from 9 to 5. That seems to share a local network with this phone during that time period. And then in the evenings, that phone seems to share a local network with a different device, which tends to be on nights and weekends. And so maybe I guess like one's a work computer for one person, and then there's their cell and their home. And then they can try to add in other attributes too. So if they get geolocation, right, maybe they can say with a little more certainty that, yeah, these devices are together for a lot of the time. And then they can add in behavioral data too. So they can see on certain devices that the person is browsing the same sorts of sites. So like technology news, University of Virginia sports, a blog about Capitol Hill, Arsenal football program. This is what I read, and there's probably like no one else in the world who kind of reads those same sets of devices. There has been some good research on how uniquely identifying browsing behavior is, but this is something the companies do tend to use to kind of make correlations a little more certain. So, and then they have their device graph. It obviously evolves over time, but that's the basic way that they've been described as how it works. And this is deterministic, and there's a couple different flavors of how this works. And so, we log onto lots of different devices, lots of different services like email and social networking. But those services don't just stay on Google and Facebook, for example. They provide a functionality on a lot of other places where they can log what you do. So Google obviously keeps track of the places I go. This is not surprising. I'm kind of glad they do this, because if I see that someone logged in from Malaysia, then I've been hacked. But Google doesn't just stay on Google. Here I am reading on the Washington Post, innocently trying to learn about a pink wine. But I'm not just on the Washington Post. There's lots of other services here. I'm here. Facebook is here. Twitter is here. Pinterest is here. I'm sure Google is here somewhere, right? And so the Ghostery logo in the corner indicates there are 29 different services on here, one of which is almost certainly Google. So if I'm still logged into Google and Facebook and Twitter, and maybe even if I'm not, they have the ability to add that to their cross-device profile about me. And so here I am. I log into these services as Justin. But wherever else they see me on those services, they can build a pretty rich profile about me. And then it's okay, so not all companies get that data. And a lot of people aren't Facebook or Google. A lot of companies like Turn or Rubicon Project or AppNexus don't have this data, so how can they get it? They'll often partner with companies that do get login data. So let's say when I log into, say, the Huffington Post, they could send to whoever they want, hey, this is Justin. There is trepidation, like I said, about sharing personal information. So a lot of times they'll just share a hash of it. And so they'll convert my name into a basic hash. And so here I am. The network has visibility into me, no way to know who I am. But if I log into different services on different devices with the same identifier, they could have relationships with those partners to send them a hash of my personal information, and then they can have their device graph about me. It's an interesting legal question if hashed personal information is still personal information. It does provide some layer of protection. Ed Felton, who was chief technologist at the FTC, the first one, has a really good blog post if you're interested in learning more and thinking through the various issues around that. There are variations. A lot of times companies do both probabilistic and deterministic. And then sometimes they'll share, right? If I'm a company, I don't have the technology to do it, I might partner with a cross-device company to get their graph. And so Sorry about the fuzziness of this. I think I stole it from the paper. I have 3 cookies, three identifiers on different devices. I have no idea, no way to relate them. I could arrange to send those to a cross-device tracking company who will also get their own identifiers about me. They already have a graph of me based on their identifiers, and so then offline they can say, hey, we think cookie 1234 and cookie ABCD and IDFA whatever are connected. That'll be invisible except for the fact that there was cookie syncing going on. Okay, so there's a lot of build-up to get to our study. So what we did is we went to 100 different sites on 2 different computers, try to see what data could be collected, could be shared to enable cross-device or third-party device correlation. Unsurprisingly, we saw hundreds and hundreds of companies on both devices collecting information. We did see a lot of cookie syncing and sharing of hashed identifiers, though those could be for other purposes. And then we went through the privacy policies to try to figure out if there's any disclosures about how this works, and there were not. Here we are. This is not surprising to people who have followed this space for a while. Companies have embed a lot of third parties, who then embed a lot of other third parties. Times of India was the winner of our competition, sharing on average of the 120 third parties on each run. In all, we found 861 different domains were connected on both devices. They could use this information to start doing probabilistic correlation. And we also saw some companies that are dedicated cross-device companies in these results. So Drawbridge, TapAd are probably considered to be the leaders in this space. We saw them in about 30% of the sites that we went to. And also, the sites we log into tend to show up a lot in these results. And so DoubleClick, run by Google, was on 87.5% of all the sites that we went to. Facebook also on about 70% of the sites that we went to. These numbers are similar to other surveys that have been done. And Google and Facebook are actually now explicit in their policies that, yeah, they do this. Facebook started about 2 years ago, changing their privacy policy to allow it. Maybe 3. Google about 1. Amazon, people are logged into Amazon, but they also provide a lot of web services. Their policy is vague. Verizon, Yahoo, also not clear. Twitter, just 2 months ago, actually changed their privacy policy to allow that. So even if you're not logged into Twitter, they'll now be collecting their widget data about you around the web in order to target ads for you. Previously, they honored the do not track setting, and now they no longer do that. We did see a lot of sharing of hashed email addresses. So 16 of the 100 sites we saw did share common hashes with about 60 third parties. That could well have been a lot more than this. We just looked for very common hashes, MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256, maybe 1 or 2 others, and not salted and encoded in any way. So they may well have been sharing a lot more. But that's still a substantial amount of sharing of that information. That could be used for cross-device tracking. It could be used for other purposes as well, maybe trying to tie to offline data, not entirely clear. We also saw a lot of cookie syncing. And so here on the left, we see Demdex, for example, shared cookie ID with 150 different companies. So it could have been doing that in at least some of those instances in order to get back information about cross-device correlations. The parties on the right are the ones who collected it, so they could be maybe providing to those parties on the left information about cross-device correlation. We used a Princeton script to find examples of cross-device tracking, and then kind of inspected it manually and said, yeah, that looks like cross-device tracking. That looks like cookies syncing. Probably it's actually a lot more than that. A lot of companies we expected to see on there we didn't see. That said, we also have no way to know if this was done for cross-device. Cookie syncing is an incredibly common practice for just real-time bidding. So these companies probably would have been doing it anyway. So hard to say what exactly is going on. So then we looked at the privacy policies of the 100 sites to see what they said about whether this is happening or not. And there is incredibly little information available. Only 3 talked about it at all. So this one site said, we do share information in ways that could be used to link users' devices. By and large, they didn't say much about it. A lot of them did reflect this distinction I talked about in the beginning about the distinction between personal information, non-personal information, reserving broad rights to do whatever for non-personal information, unclear, and then not sharing email address. Is hashed email address considered personal information? It's not clear. The privacy policies seem to not be written with this in mind. They all basically describe basic behavioral advertising, and a lot of them predated a lot of these practices. So they seem to be written in ways that just didn't even think about it. But I think a lot of the language could be read conceptually broad enough to allow for certainly probabilistic tracking, but in some cases deterministic as well. We didn't look at the privacy policies of the 861 third-party domains because that sounded exhausting, but it might be worthwhile. So how much cross-device tracking is going on? I have no idea. That's kind of the conclusion of the study. There are a few things we do know. There are some big first parties like Google and Facebook who do have a pretty broad third-party reach as well. A lot of companies are interested in getting into this space. It's not entirely clear how mature their practices are. We did see a lot of data sharing that could be used for cross-device tracking, but could be for other purposes as well. And the privacy policies we looked at were written pretty broadly and could be interpreted expansively to allow for this. A couple areas where we're doing some research and it'd be good to see some more research. We've tested some smart TVs. Email is a very common way for companies to do cross-device tracking. If you open a URL or an email, it's often tied to your email address or a hash of it. Carnegie Mellon's actually doing some really good work on finding evidence of cross-device retargeting. It'd be nice if someone wanted to review all those privacy policies. Seeing which ad blockers are effective at stopping this sort of stuff would be interesting too. And then legal analysis. We didn't do a legal analysis of whether this violates, what practices might violate, U.S. law, let alone the new GDPR. But that might be interesting to see as well. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions y'all might have. Thank you.